As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
In this complex environment, we see the Ukraine as the country. And I hope in this complex environment, we will still remember where this is the country who fighting for the sovereignty, yes, to preserve the sovereignty, to preserve the territorial integrity, because I think this is important value to be preserved on the global stage.
Aloha, and welcome to Dialogue, where conversations shape security. I'm your host, James Minnick, Colonel, United States Army retired and professor here at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. It's a pleasure to have you with us for Dialogue 30, Conflicts End in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, which intensified with Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, continues to unfold in ways that have profoundly shaped both military strategies and global perceptions. Initially, Ukraine's rapid mobilization, supported by Western military aid, allowed its forces to repel Russian advances and reclaim significant portions of occupied territory. However, the war has since become a grueling and protracted conflict with heavy casualties on both sides and no clear resolution in sight. A significant element of the war's trajectory is the battle for control over critical infrastructure. Russian forces have launched sustained strikes against Ukraine's energy systems, destroying power plants and crippling energy grids. These attacks have left millions of Ukrainians facing long hours without electricity. And with winter approaching, the humanitarian toll is expected to worsen. Russia's aims appear to be to erode Ukrainian morale and push the government toward negotiations by targeting civilians and essential infrastructure. On the front lines, the conflict is marked by shifting territorial gains and losses. While social media often showcases dramatic footage of Russian troops being routed by Ukrainian forces, the reality on the ground is far more complex. Russia has adapted its tactics, relying on a steady flow of conscripts, prisoners, and advanced weaponry, including hypersonic missiles and drones. These efforts have allowed Moscow to hold key positions in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, and its defense industries have been ramped up to ensure a steady supply of munitions and vehicles to support the war effort. Western support for Ukraine, primarily from the United States and NATO, has been instrumental in maintaining Ukraine's ability to resist. However, questions are beginning to emerge about the sustainability of this support, especially as the war drags on with no clear end in sight. In the United States, upcoming elections and shifting political priorities could influence the scale and speed of military aid. Meanwhile, European nations, despite pledging solidarity, are facing their own economic challenges, leading to concerns that the long-term support for Ukraine may wane over time. Despite these complexities, Ukraine's resilience has been remarkable. The country's ability to continue the fight, despite the severe strain on its military and civilian populations, highlights its determination to defend its sovereignty. However, as the war grinds on into the winter months, the pressures on Ukraine's resources, infrastructure, and population will only intensify, raising difficult questions about the future trajectory of the conflict and whether the international community can help broker a path towards peace. Today, we have the privilege of exploring these complex issues with Dr. Marzena Żakowska, an assistant professor and lecturer at the Faculty of National Security at Warsaw Studies University in Warsaw, Poland. Marzena, thank you for joining us today, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to our program.
Thank you.
By practice, we like to have our guests share their journey with us. So tell us your story, how you came into this field of study.
Thank you very much, Professor James, for having me today. I'm greatly appreciate for your invitation. And of course, be happy to share with our audience my story and also my insight regarding the conflict in Ukraine, which, as you mentioned, well, has huge impact, not on just on the security, of course, the security of the country, Ukraine, but also on the regional security and global security as well. Ladies and gentlemen, well, how this start? Why I put my interest in the war in the Ukraine? I mean, this came natural with my research because main topic of my research is war, armed conflict, and of course the evolution of the war, how this war evolved. And Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, is a great example and showing actually how it's used the tools, the conventional tools and non-conventional tools to waging the war, which basically in modern age we call this as hybrid warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, also what showing the war in the Ukraine, and I think it's very important to understand that, we're showing how state actor and non-state actor can play, as you mentioned, some game in order to destabilize the security and destabilize the state security, but also destabilize the security of neighbor country. And I'm talking right now about the situation which was created particular by Russia and Belarus in order to send enormous flow of migration and destabilize the neighbor country with Ukraine, particularly the country which we call belong to the east flank of NATO. So this is also very important to take a look as the next step of kind of involving nature of the war. And not last, but extremely important part, of course, why the war in the Ukraine became like close interest in my research and my study is that Ukraine, the Poland is neighbor of the Ukraine. We share the border. And of course, because of that, well, you are aware, you want to be aware on the situation which is going on in your neighbor country. And particularly, you want to be aware when you notice when Russia is organized and using so many different hybrid tools, not just in order to destabilize Ukraine, but also to destabilize your country too. So you are very aware about that. You are very aware about that. What is next? And you are want to be aware if perhaps the war would not knock to your door, as we say, yes. So if the war not become, if your country will not draw to the war. So there was also the case why the situation in Ukraine become important, not probably for me, but for many people in Poland, for many scholars in Poland as well.
Yeah, no, interesting. And I think your point about how conflict can be creeping further into this region is certainly evident in the developments that we're seeing even today. There's talk of North Korea supporting the conflict with combat troops being deployed into the region, and then South Korea's reactions and how they are providing support. I think I'd like to continue to pull on this thread of discussion you're talking about. Maybe we just kind of talk about the state of conflict. And so the battlefield has been constantly evolving, and it's been going on for 10 years, a decade, at different aspects of it. And most of us have been focused more closely in the last going on 3 years since this broader conflict. But maybe here's the question for you then, Marzena. What are the most significant recent strategic shifts in Ukraine, and how are these shifts impacting the prospects for peace negotiations? Take us through that, if you will.
Well, when we're talking about the strategic shift, I will actually focus more on the political strategic shift, which can actually greatly influence the course of the war in the Ukraine, and technically which probably give a little bit different look for the President Zelensky on the conflict, as you know, in the Ukraine, inside the Ukraine, and also can a little bit give different look also for the President Vladimir Putin, yes, as Russia, of course, well, let's say the aggressors, yes, in the conflict. So this means, well, is the forthcoming election in United States. And I think everyone is waiting for that, who will win the election, who will become the next president of United States. Because this can have enormous impact on the future, on the end of the conflict in Ukraine, but not just the conflict in Ukraine, on the relations between the Europe and United States, between NATO and United States. So I think all eyes right now looking for find out who will be next president of United States. And as we notice, somehow Ukraine become aware on that. And as we noticed the recent trip of President Zelensky to United States, and also his start like looking for the option for a mediation, for negotiation in the conflict. I think this is like a result of the situation, yes. And of course, the strategic shift in the conflict, this is also the game which Russia play. And what is the current target in the war in the Ukraine? And as we notice, well, we're going to have very difficult season, particularly for the civic society, because it's autumn season, will be winter season. And Russia know about that. And I think, well, this is why the strategy of target the infrastructure which is extremely need for the civilians, you know, during this period, is the main goal of Russia. And recently Russia showing where, yes, this how they go with that, yes. The other thing which I would like to point out, where we're talking about the counteroffensive which Ukraine present toward the Russian military forces. And well, in the counteroffensive, of course, we notice some significant, yes, success, but we notice also the challenges. And I think where here we can actually find out where not yet, but maybe coming strategic shift will be the question, response to the question, that Ukraine still receive the military aid from the West country, yes, and sustainable military aid. We're not talking just, you know, the military aid which happened from week to 2 weeks, but sustainable military aid. And as we notice, Ukraine needed that because of, as you mentioned, Russia using the most advanced technology, military technology. So in order, of course, to be able to get advance and some success, some significant success on the battlefield, on the ground, you need at least have, you know, some equipment. Also, this kind of style equipment. So, well, more drones, of course, yes, and more F-16. I will say, I'm not sure about these hypersonic weapons, but we have to be aware where Russia using these weapons, yes. So we have to be aware what is the leverage of Ukraine, how Ukraine responds to that. So to summarize and kind of point out, and just also to make more aware as audience, also I'll be looking for like strategic shift on the field of the political changes, yes. And the political changes I will directly point out on the situation in United States as the main ally for Ukraine. I will say the military changes on the battlefield, on the ground, yes, how this war change the course of the war. And I will say the more aggressive response of Russia and targeting, the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, yes. And I will say also where the military changes, forthcoming military changes, which can be adjusted dependent on the receiving the support, the sustainable military support, military aid for Ukraine. So this is complex situation. This is complex situation which Ukraine will have to face. Yes, well, and as I mentioned before, I think Mr. Zelensky, he's already aware on that.
Yeah, no, you highlight a very crucial, consequential period that we are finding ourselves in the political area. And, to put some scope on this, when you think about defense spending and financial assistance, I think Ukraine is, spending over 30% of its GDP on its defense. But even with that huge expenditure, the U.S. is appropriated well over $100 billion in defense aid to be able to provide combat equipment and munitions, and the European Union equally well over $100 billion in pledges to of aid in a broader sense. When you think of the scope of that and what it is taking to be able to support the Ukrainians' ability to put up a continued defense, this political support is hard to overstate the importance of that. Now, we spoke a little bit about agreements and as we think towards the future, but as we think towards where we've been, what comes to mind are the Minsk agreements, which maybe some of our audience is less familiar with, but they were established in 2014 and then revised in 2015 after those earlier conflicts we spoke about. And they were designed to halt hostilities and outline a political resolution in eastern Ukraine, though clearly challenges in implementation have persisted. So here's the question. Do the Minsk agreements still hold any relevance for future negotiations, or are new approaches needed going forward?
Thank you, James, for this question, because this one is crucial. And thank you that you highlight actually what this agreement brought. So definitely main point of this agreement was cease the fires. Yes. So, well, as we notice, I think where Ukrainian conflict right now showing different circumstance. When the Minsk agreement was crafted, please realize where the conflict was just involved the east part of Ukraine. So this means the Donbas region, yes. We didn't have the situation on the full-scale invasion, yes. We didn't have the situation as we have right now on some exhausting war, almost total war, yes. And we didn't have the situation of actors political actors, which is partial or full-scale involved in the war, yes. And of course, as giving the aid for the Ukraine. So totally different circumstances, totally different landscape. And the most important part in that time, Ukraine, as the government of Ukraine, it was fighting with the separatists, yes. So different style of organizing troops, different style of organizing formation of the troops. Now Ukraine is fighting with the state which, whereas Russia is one of the most important actor regarding global security, yes, global landscape, creating the architecture in the global security. So we have different also situation who is involved in the war. So first, what kind of territory is involved in the war? The second part, who is involved in the war? What kind of actors are involved in the war? And this make new stance, just how to craft the agreement, how to build the negotiation. Yeah. Because now, when you wanna have the negotiation, well, you have to think about also about Ukraine and their allies. This is probably will be game changing. How the negotiation will go depends. If Ukraine will have still, I will say, the aid, the not just military aid, but also financial aid, but also most important in the winter time, which we have to highlight that humanitarian aid for the civil society, yes. So if the aid Ukraine will receive from the European Union country and from NATO, particular NATO countries, we're talking about, of course, United States as the main leader of the NATO, yes. And from the other side, we have Russia. We have Russia, which Russia find on their own new allies in this conflict. And we can say, well, this is not just China. Of course, we have Iran, which in the regional security and global security will have some place, and where this actor is well known for quite a bit controversial policy which present, yes, in the global security stage. And so we have to acknowledge this too. And because of that, I will say, well, we need new framework which will be crafted better and will address better the current situation on the war in the Ukraine. Because, of course, the Minsk agreement, extremely important achievement, yes, but was crafted when we had the stage of limited war which just compass the east part of the Ukraine. Now we have a little bit different scenario, different landscape, and that's why we need new framework for new negotiation and new agreement as well. I'm not sure what you think about that, because
no, I agree.
You are observed, yes, as well the situation, and your experience also with the, I will have to say, the policy, the policy which is crafted, yes, in the United States, but in Asia, of course, is brilliant. So your voice definitely is important to realize how you think about this agreement and the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and of note, when the Minsk agreements were signed, I mean, Russia was not a belligerent. It was not one of the parties to the, and so it's was between Luhansk and Donetsk and Ukraine to implement those acts. And of course, it is an aggressor in this war. I want to pull a little bit now on possible outcomes, and this is what we build this episode about is as we think about conflicts, and you have suggested several scenarios for how war might end, ranging from complete sovereignty to a divided or failed state. So I want to delve into them and consider how these outcomes could shape Ukraine's future. Let's go ahead and look at the first scenario. And scenario one, that we'll put out here is a complete victory for Ukraine. In the first scenario, Ukraine emerges victorious. It maintains its sovereignty and territorial integrity with continued support from Western nations. So under that scenario, here's the question. What are the critical steps that Ukraine and its allies must take to achieve a complete victory, and what challenges and obstacles stand in their way?
Yes, very important question, but in the same way, challenging. And why? Of course, that will be the best scenario to see as the end of this conflict, yes, because if Ukraine will preserve the territorial integrity and sovereignty, for this moment, we understand where the international law are still obeyed, and all country has to obey the norms which international law create. Yes, this how should be actually. So we have some consistency regarding the order, the global order. But here is the challenges. As we know, probably without of the military support, financial support, training, it will be difficult for Ukraine to win the war with Russia. So this is the challenge, yes. If Ukraine want to win the war, well, need to receive sustainable support from the West country. And we're talking about the country, of course, who are members of European Union. We're talking about the country who are members of NATO. And here is also the challenging matters, challenging issue. The sustainable support, as you highlighted before, and I agree with you, is costly. It's costly. And the question is, well, how much longer we can support financial, yes, the war in the Ukraine. We would love to see Ukraine as sovereign country. And all we would love to see the Ukraine end the war and have the same territorial integrity before this conflict starts, so before 2014. The question is, what kind of support Ukraine receive from the West ally? How sustainable will be the support, and how long this support will going on? So this is the challenge. I will highlight the challenge. What do you think? What do you think? Maybe you have different view on that.
No, I mean, that's the crux of the issue, and being victorious is, and I laid it out earlier, is the cost and the ability to sustain that until victory can be achieved. And so we're approaching the third year now of invasion in 2022, and with no clear end sight. And you rightly noted at the beginning of the show that the critical strategic phase we're in with national elections and stuff. I want to pull us into a second scenario, a divided Ukraine. So in this scenario, you consider the possibility of Ukraine being divided, potentially also establishing a corridor from Moldova to Crimea. So here's the question for you. What factors could lead to a division of Ukraine, and how would such a division impact regional stability and the broader geopolitical landscape?
Yes, well, any division, as we're talking about the country, can create some potential destabilization and create not just, unstable situation inside the Ukraine, but also can create unstable situation for the neighbor country. And why that? At first, we have to be aware where to create the division, where you will here still have the migration, the flow of migrants, yes. You will have the internet displaced people. So all this humanitarian, situation, which we will have to face as the neighbors of the Ukraine. I'm talking about the Poland, but I think about not just Poland, but other countries which are neighbors with Ukraine too. And well, of course, which will be extremely difficult, particularly for the civilian population, and the civilian population will pay the highest price, yes, of the division on the Ukraine. The second part, well, we have to realize, okay, if there will be division of the Ukraine, how this will be done? I mean, how we organize and create the dividing line, yes, and what kind of mechanisms we implement in order to create this division. I mean, there will be like referendums. I'm not sure that there will be implement other mechanisms. Yes, there will be maybe some international protection, maybe creating some stabilization mission. So this is also something to think about, how manage, yes, this kind of operation, because this is operation. And the most important part, of course, on the division for Ukraine, I think will be very difficult to losing the identity as the state, yes, because bottom down, we do have state, we have some identity, we have some history, yes, and this was happened with the division. On top of that, we have to also realize where any division create some opportunity for, I will say, some vacuum, security vacuum situation. And of course, we don't know how long the security vacuum situation can go on and how it will be handled. But the most important part, where the security vacuum situation happened, we do have the unfortunately situation which there is grant to build organized crime, is of course grant to create some civil unrest. So technically it's grant to create potential conflict inside the Ukraine. And with the last reflection which I have, even if the Ukraine in this scenario, of course, will be divided, do we have still any guarantee that Russia will not go forward with the action, that Russia will not go forward and one day will not ask for next, part of the Ukraine? do we have any guarantee that Russia one day not start new invasion? Because already, as we notice, Russia quite but have the training in the Ukraine, how operate, how create this kind of style, hybrid style invasion, yes. So do we have any guarantee for that? This is good question, yes. In my understanding, we do not. So when we're going with this scenario of making division in Ukraine as the country first, I think we have to realize what kind of guarantee, potential security guarantee we will offer Ukraine, yes, that in the near future, this part which left for the so-called new independent state will be not attacked by Russia. Yeah. And I'm not sure how to respond to that. And I'm not sure, what kind of guarantee, sustainable guarantee we can offer Ukraine. One of the options for some part of this kind of type guarantee probably will be for Ukraine membership in NATO and membership in European Union. But the question is, it will be enough when, the other side of the conflict is actor who is one of the key actors in the global security environment. So this is the question, yes. I hope we will be able to avoid this scenario and we will not have to go with any variation of Ukraine. What is your view on that, if I may ask you?
Yeah, well, this is clearly difficult situations. And, I'm thinking broadly about negotiations and trying to bring about, negotiate because you can believe you can achieve an outcome which is better than what you can achieve by doing it yourself. And so if you can achieve, we spoke about victory in the first scenario, that would assume you can achieve your maximum objectives. The second scenario, we spoke about a divided Ukraine. One would assume that's now achieving less than your desired objectives. There are other ways this could go. And so as they are trying, as one is trying to think out what the best possible outcomes are, there's a lot to have to be thought about. In a third scenario, it could be a frozen conflict, a protracted conflict, where it just continues with no clear resolution or no peace treaty and possibly dragging on for years. I mean, Donbass has been going on for a decade. And so we could see how long things could drag out, perhaps. But here's the question for you, Marzena. What are the potential consequences of a frozen conflict for Ukraine? And what can the international community do to prevent such a stalemate occurring?
Mm-hmm. I think this can be one of the worst scenario having frozen conflict. Yeah. Because in this moment, we're talking about endless war. And we technically don't know when the war will be end, And both sides going for almost like total war. Maybe not like total with using all your capabilities, but the total war regarding, using all kind of different tools in order to prolong the war. And here is, regarding the tools, I would like to highlight where this is now maybe the war have more like conventional style of this how it's working, but we still notice where huge part of the tactics and strategy is craft based on using hybrid tools. So we do have, disinformation campaign. We do have, of course, cyber attacks. We do have implementing in the war as proxy forces and the crime organization. So this is very, very difficult environment to talking about any sustainable ground for the future negotiation regarding the peace, because perhaps in some futures can happen this what's happened in Syria, where you will be not able to quite but define with who you're talking about, to make the negotiation and to start the negotiation, because beside the legitimate government, which right now, of course, is in the Ukraine, who knows, maybe on the prolonging style of war can be built different entity, yes, with who you have to deal as well. So more actors, prolonging war, more actors become involved in the war, and this is very challenging situation. And I think where international society is aware about that, because that's how I say we do have, unfortunately, some example how this works. And one of the example, sadly, is Syria. And the other situation regarding the prolonging war, I mean, you are technically, well, looking with the state which is almost falling down, because, well, all industry eventually will be destroyed, yes. You will have like increasing loss of human life. And I'm talking not just about the military personnel, but the civilian, yes. And this is the tragic situation, yes, where having in mind where somehow probably the war will be end, and how you want to rebuild the post-war, where I will don't say even country, but zone, yes, the post-war zone, how you want to rebuild that. So many things regarding how to operate in prolonging war environment. And because of that, of the challenging which coming with that, I think where international society is aware, and for all our best interests is to end the war in Ukraine on, of course, good terms which will be favorable for Ukraine definitely as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, you're right, because as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, and you kind of presaged where I wanted to take this, and this is, in the fourth scenario, Ukraine becomes this failed state. I mean, and perhaps this is the most dire scenario, and it would, if the conflict just continues unchecked, potentially you could lead to this significant loss of governance and control. And you've kind of alluded to some other examples in other countries. So let me pull you a little bit more on this and ask you, what are the early warning signs that Ukraine might be on the path to becoming a failed state? And what urgent actions are needed to avert this crisis?
Well, in my view, we start with acknowledge who holding the political power, yes, in the country. So right now, I think Ukraine is pretty much in good condition, because it's clear, yes, where the political power is around Mr. Zelensky and his political circle. If will be any change, you definitely have different actors, which quite bit will be, showing where they are equal and have equal voice to talk about the future of Ukraine, of the gain, what they want to gain from the conflict, yes. And where this can happen, where sometimes we can have the situation ongoing, not just the conflict between the Ukraine and Russia, but where outbreak, but in different, of course, scale of inside conflict. So before we have the Donbass region, but now we can have further situation, and we can have new actors who will proclaim, yes, new regions and wanted the autonomy of new regions in Ukraine, which but will be where I would say difficult to handle even for international society how operate in this kind of type environment, yes. And the other thing, increasing, of course, the crime by operating in the Ukrainian crime organization. This for me is red flag where is something going on, yes, because for this moment the corruption level is increasing. For this moment, of course, just ordinary crime is increasing too. So this is this kind of type factor which make the landscape extremely difficult to navigate. And how prevent that? I mean, international society can put the foot inside the conflict scenario inside Ukraine by organizing, of course, the mission, peacekeeping mission. Yes, this probably maybe change the environment to. I will be far away to say where there will be more safer environment, but at least there will be not so much, crime organizing environment. And somehow we have, the example where it is possible. Of course, this happened after the conflict, but I'm talking how the mission can a little bit, change the environment and quite a bit control the situation in the country. And this happened, of course, in Kosovo, but in Kosovo, it was after the conflict, yes. But I'm not talking about the circumstances, what is after the conflict. My point is where, how the peacekeeping mission can work in order to create, to maybe prevent, increasing the crime inside the Ukraine, and the same, to prevent, to couple Ukraine as the state, yes. If this is possible, it is possible. The question is, in this situation, in somehow Russia will allow international society to organize this kind of type mission. Yeah. Because as we know, I mean, the first, of course, step to craft this mission is get the mandate from United Nations, which can be challenged, yes. Where other we can use, of course, the maybe different mechanisms, but still in these current circumstances and the place which Russia is put in United Nations, I think will be very difficult to organize international, peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. But maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to say to be wrong. Yes, I would love to see myself wrong in actually this particular situation.
Yeah, no, you lay out some really challenging possibilities as we think about how this can be addressed and how it can be resolved. And we need a lot of smart people thinking on this, because if it was easy, it would be clear what the approach would be. And yet, as you've rightly noted, the impact on people is real, and it demands very deliberate and thoughtful approaches to try to find us a way through this. As we in our remaining time, I want to transition to audience questions. And the first one, kind of pulls back on what we started speaking about. This is U.S. political influence. And so the question then, as we, how might a change in the U.S. presidential administration in 2025, and next week is the elections in the United States. So how might a change, including a potential election of Donald Trump, alter the defensive posture of Ukraine? And what would be the likely reactions from the EU and Ukraine to such a political shift?
Thank you, James. This is a very insightful question. And particular, also to answer this question, we have to remember, well, the previous time of presidency of Mr. Donald Trump and his previous approach to the relations, which he kind of laid down between the Europe and United States. And of course, it will be, I believe it will be challenged. It will be challenged if, as you mentioned, if Mr. Trump will win the election. I think will be shift in the political priorities of United States, and I'm not sure where still the priorities will be the ending. Probably will be quick ending the war in the Ukraine, but I'm not sure that the priorities will be support Ukraine in fight against Russia. Well, the question is also, well, how Mr. Trump will see the relations between United States and NATO, because this is also significant factors regarding the war in the Ukraine. And also the second question, how Mr. Trump will see the relations between United States and European Union. Yes. Well, this is complex. This is really very, very complex situation, and I think this approach can be changed, because as we know, many factors can actually just show up on the way, which even when we have, some previous scenario and we already have previous outline how we want to handle the situation and how we want to create the relation between Europe and United States. In war, as you know better, as you serve in the military, everything can happen, and this is day by day situation. So who knows? Right now, Mr. Trump, as far as his public speech, he mentioned where he don't see the war in the Ukraine as ongoing forward. Yes, and sounds like he don't see where he will continue the support for the Ukraine. But that's how I say, everything can change because this is war, yes. And you don't know what kind of factor can happen on the way, yes. And as new president of United States, where he will definitely have to consider many different factors, many different scenarios, and many different, relations which some action can cost. So extremely complex environment, Well, I hope where in this complex environment we see the Ukraine as the country, and I hope where in this complex environment we will still remember where this is the country who fighting for the sovereignty, yes, to preserve the sovereignty, to preserve the territorial integrity, because I think this is important. This is important value to be preserved on the global stage. And I think while, of course, this how I say, to be president of the United States is enormous job and enormous task to handle. But I hope where we see Ukraine in this light, yes, and the decision which will be taking regarding the Ukraine will consider, the stage of the country, Ukraine as the country, yes, because they can have, further consequence, not just for Ukraine. We have to think about also for the further consequence on different country in Europe, in particular the neighbor country in Europe, whose previous part of the Eastern Europe, yes, and had previous some historical relations with Russia, sometimes very difficult relations with Russia. So having in mind, the Ukraine as the one country and preserve the territorial integrity of the Ukraine, we having in mind also preserve the territorial integrity other country, the neighbors of the Ukraine. And this is also only one thing which I would love to of course, the new political establishment in the United States take into consideration. But of course, they will for sure have this in mind. So what is your view on that?
Well, that was an amazingly comprehensive response, and you pulled into some other areas. But I thought, as you were speaking, I mean, these are the first question. This is questions about national interests as states, the United States, Ukraine, European nations have to make decisions based on what is in their national interest, and so they will make decisions predicated on that without a doubt. Ukraine is without equivocation has prosecuted their defense over the last several years at a level which I don't think, which few people suspected. In the opening days of the conflict, there was thought that Zelensky and his cabinet members would probably evacuate the country, and then we would have a collapse. That didn't happen. You spoke about the issues with regard to how this affects broader outside the battlefield of Ukraine, and I think we're yet to realize all the implications of where this could take a global community. In our remaining time, Marzena, I think we have had a wonderful time together, but maybe you might be able to recommend a book or two to our audience that as they want to know more about this, you may turn them to a location. Do you have recommendations for us, perhaps?
Ladies and gentlemen, right now of course many good books on the market which present the situation in Ukraine and the historical factors, the current situation, the relation with Russia. But in my view, in order to understand what is going on, I will start from position Mark Galeotti, and this is called Putin Wars. And I think what is very insightful to take a look on this book at first, in order to understand how the administration, the Mr. Putin administration, create war, because it's not just Ukraine. This is about the region. And I will start from this position. Regarding the situation, particular situation in the Ukraine, I will recommend in the book War in the Ukraine, Making Sense of Senseless Conflict. And this is very interesting position because present the part which can be taken to the peace negotiation, and also present, when you analyze, when you read the book, you analyze, what is the interest for Ukraine, what is the interest for Russia, what is the interest for global international environment to end this conflict. Also, maybe not go too much, but Putin wars on the Ukraine, Russia campaign for global counter-revolution, somewhere Ramani. If you have time, please take a look on this position too. This is critical point of view to understand also this conflict. And I will also suggest the Gate of Europe, and we have History of Ukraine, Sehii Plokhy, and his second book, the Russia-Ukraine War, The Return to History. When we're talking about the peace negotiation, when we're talking about the peace agreement, it's extremely important to know the roots of the conflict, yes. Because how we want to create the end of the conflict if we don't know very well the roots of the conflict. And if you, ladies and gentlemen, reach for this book, you will definitely get the knowledge of the roots of the conflict. So this is, of course, few positions. I will be very happy to send information regarding even more position if you would like to, James. But I don't want to overwhelm us audience because I know the time is valuable, and I think if they will reach for this position, they will have the knowledge what is going on in the Ukraine.
Now, this has been a wonderful hour together. You have helped us better understand the complexities of this. Thank you for those thoughtful book recommendations. We will add that to our show notes so that the audience can pull and find those materials as well. As we conclude today's dialogue, it's clear that the path to peace in Ukraine is complex, with scenarios ranging from decisive victory to prolonged stalemate. A sustainable resolution will depend on navigating strategic, political, and economic challenges supported by adaptive international cooperation. These conversations shape security. Join us on November 12th for Dialogue 31, Indo-Pacific Underwater Competition. We're bringing together 5 experts from Korea, India, and the United States to explore underwater competition, maritime domain awareness, seabed warfare, and safeguarding submarine cables. From all of us at DKI APCSS, thank you for joining this important conversation. I'm James Minnick, and until we meet again, aloha oi. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.